We're here.
All right.
Welcome to my living room.
Well,
We're sitting on the floor.
Yeah, it's lovely, and welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks so much for making this happen again.
This is awesome. I'm excited to chat with you on lots of directions, but first, before we went on air, you mentioned you just finished reading The Four Agreements again.
I did.
And I would love to hear your impression of that. And this is a book that's very often recommended by guests. So for anyone who hasn't read it, what were your impressions and what stood out most to you, or what stayed with you most, maybe?
I think that books like that, you've probably heard like it's a more relevant decision to read one or two or a few books quite deeply instead of just like consuming all of the books in the world to prove to people that you're really smart. I think The Four Agreements is one of those books that if you literally could just pretty much base your life around those really simple four agreements and some of the basic fundamentals from it, and integrate that in your daily life. So what I really liked about it is I liked the simplicity of it, the brevity of it, and just that it's like a simplification of how easy it can be to do this life experience. And I think we can easily overcomplicate ourselves and make things feel like it's like so complex and complicated to get things done or be a good person or be successful. And what I liked about it is it really is like draws it back to like tell the truth, do your best. What's the other one? Don't take anything personally.
That's a big one right now. I feel like
huge.
Yeah.
And don't make assumptions.
Yeah, those two could do for society quite a bit of good right now, I feel like.
It's crazy. Within that, just like those little subtle details, in each moment that I think that, I certainly feel like I could have read that book, 15 years ago and it would have been supportive. There's certain moments like, I don't think I quite did my best in that moment. Like I kind of was like, whatever it was, some emotional thing. I wasn't into the leadership at the moment or whatever thing it was. And I kind of just like slacked off. And I'm like, I think if I just continued to ride that mantra of like, no matter the scenario, do your best, and no matter the scenario, tell the truth, and that baggage and that weight of wrapping ourselves up in all the various different forms of lies that we may have wrapped ourselves up in, maybe since we were little kids. Maybe we're telling ourselves lies that we don't even realize, and so I think that life can be this unpacking of getting deeper and deeper into this state of truth and authenticity. And that leads to ease, and ease would be the inverse of dis-ease, and then maybe you get into the weeds of what that means exactly. So
yeah,
good book.
It talks a lot about that, like the stuff that we get programmed with early in childhood that we don't necessarily choose, that becomes part of the way we operate, and how these kind of four simple things help you re-anchor and choose a pattern forward that's not the ones we were just raised with. And it's interesting when I read it about once a year as well, and it always strikes me as it's so simple and everything in it is largely like common sense. Like you read it, you're like, well, yeah, but it's also so profound in its simplicity too.
Most things that are really impactful. Einstein, lots of people have various different quotes along the lines of if you can't teach it to like a third grader or whatever they said, then you don't really understand the subject. And I think that's, if you wind things back, I think that's why people resonate with your work. That was the function of kind of like the mantra of most of the things that I do is figuring out how do we take these seemingly complex topics and make them be digestible, meaningful bites that people can integrate into their present moment. I think that's the case with most things. If there's something this is a really obvious one with like the healthcare system. That's like, if you really wind things back to what the human organism really needs to be healthy and fulfilled and have adaptability and longevity and strength and flexibility and all those things, it's like the list is not that long. It's like the four agreements. It's like there's pretty much four things. Like expose yourself. I'm kind of making the four things up right now at the moment, but like generally speaking, probably most people listening to this would agree. It's like you need to be outside. You need to get adequate exposure to sunlight. There'd probably be extra bonus points to get maybe the full spectrum of light, including all of the hours, not villainizing any one specific moment, but especially gathering some of that infrared stuff in the morning and then around sunset. Have varied temperatures. All this is encapsulated into nature. Like just go into the nature will do the thing.
Yeah.
You need to have meaningful relationships, and a part of that comes into like telling the truth, in the four agreements, not making assumptions about your relationships, not taking things personally within your relationships. having purpose. Like what gives you, what's the point of you waking up each day? I think that's something. It's like, yeah, like, am I living a life that it actually feels worth living? Or am I just kind of going through the motions? And if I'm just kind of going through the motions, living out maybe somebody else's dream or somebody else's suggestion, or influence, there's no sustainability and longevity in that. And at some point, like the house of cards, it's probably going to collapse because there's just no foundation there. And then suddenly you go through this midlife crisis thing. It's like it's the longevity part that I think is really immensely important. And I think the only way to have longevity is to keep things pretty simple. And so whatever your 4 things are, I know that was a wandery way of not really saying anything particular, but the simplicity of or health is much simpler than what I think we make it out to be, culturally speaking, and from a consumer perspective.
Absolutely, and at least that idea of you can get 80% of the way there with those simple, very often free things that go back to essentially nature and relationships.
Yeah.
And I think it's easy to get swept into the idea of all these fancy like biohacks and supplements, and those all I think have their time and place. But if you don't have those foundational things, those things won't be as effective anyway.
That's why the one thing I didn't say is the thing that like the entirety of my book and podcast and brand and everything represents is movement. So that's the other part of it. But then movement is actualized in all of those other things. So as you're expressing out your purpose, as you're at work, as you're communicating with your relationships, you're moving yourself into those relationships. Maybe you go out dancing with someone, your body language, your capacity to have empathy with someone else. That's a product of being able to kind of move yourself into the position of that person to be able to feel where they're coming from. Sorry for interrupting you.
No, that's a great vacation, and ironically, so every year I do something that scares me, which is just part of my getting out of my comfort zone challenge to myself. And this year it's dancing, because it used to be singing. That used to be the most terrifying thing I could think of. So I did that, and this year it's going to be dancing. So I'm figuring out what that's going to look like.
That's great. Yeah, there's
but movement.
There's what is it? I think it was research from Albert Einstein College. They found that dancing was out of the various different type of mediums of like crossword puzzles and different kind of like brain games and such, like walking, cold exposure. I don't know if they did that, but stuff like that. They found that dancing was the most impactful medium within that study that they found to be preventative for dementia and cognitive decline and things of the sort for elderly. So it's that there's a lot of variables there. One, dancing, harmonizing your body to music, that's major. To integrate the way that you're moving in all of your appendages and your joints and finding rhythm to this outside sound coming in, that just is such a complex equation. And then you compound that with connecting with another person. Now, okay, I'm going sound. Okay, now I'm leading the person or I'm following the person. It's so much more complex than just like going, putting some heavy metal music on your earbuds and just doing bicep curls. Like that dance, it just integrates the parts so effectively well. And then it also, the other part of it is like the joy factor and some of like the more, I think, magical parts of connecting with another person. That we have these isolated research studies that, isolate specific factors and variables, and then you read something in the New York Times about it, or it goes on PubMed, you're like, aha, this is it. But in fact, I think life is dramatically more magical, and then we kind of contain little isolated parts of it. We try to hang our hat on those parts exclusively. But it's just an interesting thing to think, like all of the things that we would do that would be specifically brain-based, just that act of dance seems to trump the whole thing. So says Albert Einstein College. It's pretty interesting.
Well, that's an encouragement to do it, because everything else, like in the chess world or Rubik's Cube or brain games, I feel safe in those worlds, and dancing's the out of the comfort zone one. But I think, at least for me, and this might resonate with some people listening, I think it has part to do with having been like disconnected from my body for so long, that I feel like it's like a relearning of how to, like you said, to harmonize with the music or how to connect with someone else, because that requires the body part. Yeah. And I got really good at the brain part for a long time. And I'm like relearning that as part of like my post-trauma adjustment. But I think this is something I've heard a lot from a lot of people about, is that kind of disconnection from the body. and relearning how to get back in our body, whether it be from trauma or whether it be from, for the moms listening, childbirth, which makes your body somewhat, you carry a baby, you nurse a baby, your body's not 100% your own for a long time. And often I feel like women can get detached from that communication with their own bodies. And I also saw firsthand like how much somatic work can help us, like reintegrating with the body can actually help the mental, spiritual side of processing as well.
Yeah.
And I think movement is a key here as well. So I'd love to kind of delve into that with you of like, what are some of the ways we can start learning to reconnect?
Yeah, I think the first thing, I mean, that's so beautifully said. And I think the first thing is being willing to listen to what your body is saying, which sounds like, oh boy, it's like woo-woo kind of language, but I mean, your body says so much. Maybe you have inflammation, maybe you have some type of irritable bowel situation going on. Maybe you have some fuzzy stuff on your tongue. Maybe your eyes are bloodshot. Maybe your back hurts. Maybe you have some joint dysfunction. There's all of these different things. Maybe you have acne. All the things that you've covered so exceptionally well. Your body it's on your team. So if it's communicating something to you that you may deem to be unfavorable, it's just its way of communication saying, hey, we need to make an adjustment. So as opposed to coming from a place of, okay, we need to, it's like your kids say something to you that you don't really, maybe they speak another language. They come back in speaking gibberish. It's like, dang, little Mary comes back in, she's going, lama, 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 lama. She's just in her room going, lama, 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 lama. I don't understand it. It's annoying. It's obnoxious. Like, what do we do? Do we cut off little Mary? Do we lock her in her room? Like, do we get her meds? Like, what do we do? And then probably a more empathetic, caring, mature parent would be like, maybe we, spend some time with this habit or this trait or with little Mary, and we kind of like see like what's behind her doing this thing that seems really obnoxious and annoying and like inappropriate. And I think we can do that with our body and with specific, symptomology of my experience, going from the lens of kind of actually listening to it and being respectful of the stuff that the body's saying, but then also from a lens of like, if you're feeling anxious, or feeling stressed out, that's something that I experience with some level of regularity. I'll have something will come up or whatever it may be that will cause me to have this sensation of like, I don't know, like an anxiety in my belly kind of feeling, like, oh, like I gotta like go. I don't know where to go exactly or what to do or where to put my energy or attention, but like, oh, I gotta do something, or relationships are an amazing opportunity for this to kind of present certain triggers that might make you feel a certain way, maybe anxious, maybe avoidant, any of those things. And so to take those as opportunities, like never waste a trigger is an idea that I think is interesting. Take those opportunities and say like, okay, where do I feel this in my body right now? So that anxious attachment style they might be having with a boyfriend or girlfriend or, partner, you might, if you, instead of just doing the thing, and jumping on Hinge or Tinder or sending messages that you might regret or whatever it may be, actually take a moment and go in with like, what is this feeling that I'm experiencing right now? And is there a location for it in my body? This gets into like Peter Levine's work and somatic experiencing, or Eugene Gendlin is another great resource for this. And his work's called The Felt Sense. And it's going in and feeling exactly, observing exactly where we're feeling certain sensations in our body. And that, that anxiety a person might feel in their stomach, for example, going in, sitting with it, instead of running around it, sitting with it and saying, okay, that sensation, does it have a color? Does it have a shape? Does it have a density? Does it have a volume? Does it have a sound? And then from there, once you do kind of create a little bit of separation of like, that feeling that I was pushing away, and like, I found it discomfortable, so I just kind of shut it out. Suddenly, it's not the entirety of me. I'm not that feeling. I'm actually able to witness that as like a thing in my body. And then it's like, okay, well, maybe you could even ask that thing a question. It's like, what are you, whatever questions work for you. What are you doing? Why are you here? What are you trying to tell me? And just being with the thing. And now it's like, okay, now we're talking to little Mary, or being with little Mary, as opposed to just like shutting it out. And so I think that's, more of like a psychosomatic type lens, of movement and how to tap into the body. But I think that's a great starting place,
Yeah, and I think two really important things that you just said is that like sitting with it versus judging it. I think often we're quick to jump into the like any kind of pain, anger, fear, or like this is bad and place a label on it and then try to fight it.
Yeah.
Versus accepting it and feeling it.
Yeah.
Often, ironically, helps it pass more quickly.
Yeah.
And also, I think like language is so important. Like I often hear people say like, "Oh, I am angry" or "I'm afraid," and instead of
it's like, who are you exactly?
Right. Like it's like be very cautious the statements that you put behind the words "I am" because that's a powerful statement.
Yeah.
And so instead of "I'm angry" or "I'm afraid," I am experiencing or I feel anger at the moment. Like instead of associating our identity with that emotion, like you said, stepping back and separating it. I think for parents listening too, this is a really helpful thing to do with kids, especially when they're young and they're having trouble understanding when they're having all these big emotions, is giving them the space to step back and ask them, help them walk through like, where are you feeling this?
Yeah.
And what color is it? And can we give it a name?
Oh yeah.
Kids love giving it a silly name and then it's now not them. And then they can realize like, oh, I'm not this temper tantrum.
Yeah.
And they start to have those tools and the more clarity with which we can name an emotion, I feel like also help us understand it and then let it go when we're able, instead of just like lumping everything under one category of like anger.
Yeah.
It's like there's so many more detailed words beyond that. Figure out where it's coming from and what it feels like and where it is in your body.
And that's, going back to the Four Agreements book, that's Don Miguel Ruiz, that's his name, right? He describes this as this kind of the stories that we tell our kids and that we're told as domestication, and my lens more from like the movement realm, and like the Align Method book is, that's a book that I just, at some point we'll probably get into like that specifically. A big part of that is the domestication more from like a movement lens, of how the modern world that we exist in forms our bodies to be who we are. At least from like a postural perspective, and then that ties into the way we think and feel and relate in the world. But there's also the initial domestication of the stories that we learn from our parents and what's okay and what's not okay. And I think that a really like an elephant in the room within that is I think death is something that is kind of a weird, sticky, uncomfortable subject. I think sexuality is kind of like it's like this, as opposed to it being, and there's, lots of other ones, different, just different judgments of some people. Like I remember growing up having some judgment around gay people. That wasn't me, that was the culture that I grew up in. And if you see that throughout nature, there's homosexuality all over the place. Like some percentage of most creatures cruising around, there's some expression of homosexuality, tendencies throughout that, and just any of those different stories that we get. And then it's a process of starting to parse out, okay, what is authentically me, and then what is me, and what are these domesticated kind of structures that I've been formed into, and are these structures to the support of my greater good, or are they limitation, and we're continually re-perpetuating all of this stuff with the words that we speak throughout the day. And so if you just start to come back and start to gain some level of maybe responsibility or sovereignty around the words that come out of your face, and just have like an audit of like, okay, like I'm saying, my trauma, or my anger, or I'm angry, or I'm sad, all of those things. It's like just taking a moment to reflect and say like, what does that mean exactly? And I think that's, words are just so immensely powerful. I appreciate you bringing that up.
Yeah, and I think it's a conscious unpacking often as adults when we were given some of those beliefs as children. And as adults, we then get to make the choice to start to unpack them. And that's a thing I started doing consciously as well, is at the beginning of each year, writing down things I'm relatively certain I believe to be true, and then intentionally challenging myself on those things with the idea that at the very least I'm going to gain empathy and understanding for people who might have a different viewpoint by researching their viewpoint.
Yeah.
And if I'm not right, I want to know that. But it's like that constant unpacking. It's a conscious process as adults.
Yeah, the moralistic judgment of right and wrong, I think is, there could be a whole book just about that. And we kind of flippantly, like me and probably a lot of people flippantly throw around like, oh, that's right, wrong, bad, good, as though it's inherently, objectively is true that this idea or story, where it may be, is that. And that's like, I think unpacking that and removing the judgment. I think that's one of the best things that a parent could offer for a child, is no matter what you bring to me, I do not have judgment. Like, I have acceptance of the thing. It might not make me feel, I don't have to like disassociate and bypass and just be like, no matter what you do, I'm like, woohoo, like, yay. Like, that's not what I'm saying. But this is such a safe space, a safe container, this house, you know, or our relationship, that there is nothing that you could say or do that would lose that unconditional love that I have for you. And to be able to create that, I mean, that's just such an amazing place for the physical body to grow, you know, and the mind to grow. If a person feels insecure with their ability to tell their parents, or maybe even tell themselves something, you know, then that will put a knot in the body, in the mind. And then from that point where there was an unacceptance of ourselves, or like a divorcing from ourselves at that moment, because we're not able, we don't have, our domestication doesn't allow us to accept this thing about ourselves at some point, when we were 13, when we were 20, when we were 5, whatever it was, then your life will, you know, pretty much be probably a process of seeking out ways to unwind back to that point, find acceptance, and then move forward again. So the sooner that we can come from a place of like, no matter what you got, I'm here for it. With myself, with my family, with my friends. Man, what a cool world. You know?
That's a huge thing for parents, and I think I make sure my kids hear me tell them every day, I love you unconditionally. There's nothing you could ever do that will change that, but the other important key is, and there's nothing you ever have to do to earn that or increase that.
Yeah.
It already is unconditional, and that was the part I felt like I didn't fully get. For me, I had to unpack that, like, fear of disappointment. I think a lot of us make it into adulthood, like, with the fear of disappointing.
Do you think that was your history?
Like, the way my parent dynamics were, I was afraid of disappointing them, and so I was like super type A in school, and always had to, like, because I got love through achievement.
Right.
And then I had to learn to like unpack that and figure out like, who am I separate of those things? And that goes back to some of that, like the 4 agreements and learning our inner selves more.
Well, I think who you are, I mean, that's an interesting question. Like, who am I separate from my achievements? How does that question hit you?
That's when I've been on a journey on for a couple of years, because I think the default is to want to answer like, oh, I'm a mom and I'm a writer and answer with our titles. And if you take all of those things away, I think when you get into like Buddhism or a lot of these other traditions, you eventually arrive at the idea that the true answer to the question of who am I is just that I am at its core. But I think for me there were other answers, and it showed me a dichotomy within myself where I had tried to like figure out one or the other and assign myself a label. I realized no, there actually is a beautiful dichotomy in all of us. Mm-hmm. And so it was like, I am gentle and strong, and I am fierce and love, and like I had to learn what are these pieces of me that are not achievements but that are traits. And that was a long process of meditation and journaling. Yeah.
You know the original meaning of persona? Persona is the masks that they would wear in I think it was Greco-Roman or maybe Greek times, but I think it was Greek theater. They would wear these masks that were these conical masks to be able to project sound. So they're projecting essentially, you know, their character out into the audience, and they wear their persona in order to project this identity. And then when they get done with the theater, they go back and, you know, the villain and the protagonist and, you know, all the extras and everything, they come back and they're all hanging out and they smoke a cigarette together, drink some wine, and you're like, oh cool, like mask is off, you know. And it's like, we navigate the world, you want to have the most well taken care of, you know, like you could worship the persona. You can, you know, you want to paint it really well, and you want to maybe carve it out, and you want to get like the angles right to project the sound just perfectly, you know, and really like you know, materialistically worshiping the persona is so cool. And then within that, acknowledging that this is a mask that you can take off, and now I can put on the mother mask, and now I can put on the CEO mask, and now I can put on the beggar mask, and now I can put on the victim mask, and now I can put on the villain mask. You know, and I can wear all this throughout it, but it's becoming a very like metaphysical conversation. But the Ram Dass, you can't have a conversation like that without mentioning Ram Dass. He said, "Who you think you are is vulnerable, and who you are is invulnerable." You know, and so operating from the awareness that who you are is not that mask, and who you are can't be burnt, can't be twisted or destroyed or any of that. And who you think you are, your motherness can be taken away, right? Your villain, like all of those different things, like it's not can be taken away, it will be taken away. And so investing some level of your bandwidth to that other part, and then also, being really effective with the various personas that we wear, and realizing that they are a mask, and I have the fluidity to be able to flip between those different masks, but not, I think this is the Jim Carrey movie, The Mask. I think this probably is what it represents. The mask, if you wear it too long, it can start to consume you. And then you think that you're the mask.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. And then, like, also recognizing, I would say that those masks they serve the subconscious in some way. Even the ones like the victim mask, or like different ones like that may seem less than ideal, they serve our subconscious. They keep us safe in some way. Another
It's
way
a tool, it's like a boat.
Exactly. And so rather than even judging those things as bad, we can recognize, like, why were they here? And for me, undoing some of those was learning to thank them, actually, for having kept me safe and for serving me. Another analogy that has come up for me in some therapy actually is the idea of the picture that we paint for our lives. I had a therapist call me out one time when I was having this inner turmoil about decisions, and she was like, made me pause, and she's like, I'm going to challenge you. I don't think that you actually feel these feelings because you worry about the outcome, because you have all these things in place where you know that's going to be fine. And it's not because you worry about your kids, because you actually know they're going to be fine. This turmoil is coming because this is not the picture that was painted for your life that you're supposed to follow, and you're trying to paint your own picture. And this is the first time you've had to do this. And that's kind of that, also unpacking that childhood domestication and learning to paint our own picture for our lives. And I think often we don't maybe have the opportunity to get there until some area in adulthood. Have you interviewed Byron Katie yet?
Twice.
Okay, I thought you had.
Yeah, we did. She let me do acro yoga with her and flip her around and all the things. It was a very nice experience.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
But I love her questions for that. Is this true?
Yeah, right.
Do I know for sure that this is true? And what would it look like if it wasn't true? And
and then where it becomes, I think, interesting is the physicality part of all this and the domestication. We wear certain types of personas or identities in the way that we move and express. So if you ever have done theater or some maybe like improvisation or maybe stand-up comedy or any of those things I know you're doing, you will place your body into certain postural patterns in order to suggest or indicate certain sensations or emotions to evoke that in other people, because we have this global, international language of these facial expressions mean this postural pattern. If you win a race, the same, no matter whether you're blind or deaf or Cambodian or a New Yorker, like you get done, you pass through that tape, shoulders back, right? Your vital organs open up, your throat opens up, you might like look up, hand, you go to supination with the hand, like everything just open. I'm in this receiving place. I feel safe, I feel loved, I feel supported. The tribe loves me, right? And then you finish dead last and you collapse through the finish line. Unless you had some like really excellent parenting or something, and there's really truly you're not attached and there's no judgment about what this means and all that stuff, and it's just a game, first, last, whatever it is. But I think there is something really valuable in competition. But within that, the interesting thing is like have we as a culture placed ourselves into a position globally, at least in Western culture, into a structural and I would say mental emotional position of collapse. And so when you look at this, like school systems, nothing against school systems or any kind of institution like that, but before a kid goes into grade school, like kindergarten, what's a kid do with their lives? What's a kid's like natural innate biology suggesting to them? Like, how do they live? They're climbing trees, they're eating poop, they're like running real fast, they're rolling, they're building up a pile of leaves and splashing through it. They're problem solving. They might be dancing, no judgment, just like, oh man, some music comes on, like, oh, I'm just dancing, and then suddenly they get placed into this kind of new movement mold, then it's like, well, it's not okay to do that. You need to be able to sit, and you need to be able to stare into this screen or into this book or pass this Scantron test, and you need to be in your little cubicle place, and we don't really give you much education around how to set your hips up for balance, and ease, and be able to like essentially set your physical body up for success. It's just kind of like, stay in this chair. And if you can't stay in that chair, then there's now something wrong with you.
Yeah,
And now we need to figure out a way to do that. And, medication would be an option. Maybe, you need detention. So our solution for this is like, well, you're kind of ornery. You seem like you really want to move. How about detention?
We're gonna let you go next to solve this problem.
I know what we'll do. After school, especially in the wintertime, where now it's like you have this last little glimmer of sunlight to go out and be able to get that energy out and be able to express all the things that your innate biology has been suggesting, throughout the day. Now we're gonna cut that out, so you gotta stay in school a little bit longer. And sit in that chair a little bit longer. We're gonna break you. It's like, whoa. So come from that lens. And that's not, I think, the entirety of any school system or the fault of any single individual. I think teachers, if you're a teacher, you probably really care about kids, for the most part, I imagine. But the system as a whole, I think it's like the ship is going, statistically, it's going in a direction of increased anxiety and increased depression and increased self-harm and increased obesity. And there's a lot of beautiful things in Western culture happening as well. But statistically speaking, if you're looking at the statistics that I see, it seems like the ship is going towards this direction of dis-ease. And so it's a conversation I think is not abundant enough, and it's like just like the lowest hanging fruit. It's like this glaring elephant in the room. I don't know if you use glaring and elephant, I don't think that makes sense, but it's at least low hanging fruit is the way that we're moving, or the way that we are moved in a day-to-day basis. And the solution to that isn't more workouts, or more, Pilates or more whatever. I think the solution is saying, like, what's the, Bruce Lipton is another guy that I've done. I think we did just one podcast together, but he wrote Biology of Belief. He's like one of the kind of pioneering thinkers around epigenetics and such. And one of the things that he mentioned to me was when he's working with cells in a petri dish, in order to change the cell, he doesn't do anything to the cell itself. He changes the culture that it's residing within. So you change the culture, change the shape of your living room, change the shape of your classroom, change the shape of your work, maybe start to bring some nature into your domesticated space, bring more plants in, bring more sunlight in, bring more kind of varied environments, maybe have a foam roller on the ground, or maybe put get some myofascial balls, or maybe you bring like a cool rock into the house or something underneath your desk, and you kind of step and you feel the different contours of your foot. Whatever you do, bring that into your home. Put a pull-up bar into your doorway, so you just naturally are just compelled to reach up and hang off of that thing. Then you're changing the culture of the individual, and the individual just naturally, organically kind of reshapes to fit it. I just think that's an interesting concept.
Yeah, and I think a couple important things there is, I agree with you. I think teachers inherently care a lot about kids, and every teacher I know is an amazing person, and they care about changing the world in a positive way. Yeah. Just like almost every doctor I've ever met is an amazing person who cares about helping people's health. Yeah. And there's still problems within the existing systems.
Yeah, it's not. I don't think it's a fault of most individuals. It's the general direction of the system. And that's, I think that another thing that's happening now, which I would enjoy going deeper into the movement conversation, but another thing I think is happening that's a part of the movement conversation is our divorcing ourselves from each other, creating separation. Okay, I'm blue, you're red. I'm vax, you're no vax.
Well, and those are also those I am statements that people then let become part of their identity. Yeah. That get in the way of actual relationships and human connection. Yeah, and
so when you have that disconnection or disassociation or separation, there is value in boundaries. It's not like we should just become like this aqueous amoeba whole, which that's ultimately what we are, whether we realize it or not. But it is valuable. It does have value to maintain boundaries and identity and persona and all that. But I think something that I personally see lacking in like the social media sphere and the news sphere is a lack of empathy and compassion, and like seeing the world from someone else's shoes, like actually doing the work to do that. And I think when you do that, like acknowledging that person that you vehemently disagree with, if you lived their life exactly the way that they've lived their life, same parents, same environmental conditions, same age, same astrological whatever situation, birthday, like you would be that person. So when it's just starting to take that perspective of like, oh, okay, like we're so much more similar than we think we are different. And so coming from that place of compassion, I think we can jump over into like a physical conversation with that. It's like having disconnection in your body. If your foot's not communicating with your knee, not communicating with your hips, your spine, and your neck, and your central nervous system isn't communicating with your enteric nervous system, your organs and your viscera, and your immune system and your cardiovascular system and all these systems, it's like suddenly the cardiovascular system thinks that it's the king, and the whatever, the lymphatic system is like they have a war between each other. That's not a healthy body. So it's figuring out that integration, that connection. I think at an individual level, it's like, okay, well, what are the solutions for all this, and how do we prevent a civil war? If that's even a possibility. I think the solution at an individual level, really honestly, one of the spokes would be having a deeper relationship with one's own physical body. Because if you feel inherently disconnected in yourself, and you feel kind of like that collapsed state, or you feel kind of disorganized, or you feel anxious, or you feel depressed, or you feel any of that, you feel pain, how does that affect the way that you relate to people? How does that affect the way that you show up to that debate, or show up to, if you're a government official and you guys are making policies, and you have this agonizing pain in your back, and you have this anxiety, and so I think the solution for all of us, one of the solutions that is tenable for every single person, is to start to deepen the relationship with their own selves. Man, this is like a pretty spiritual metaphysical conversation. That was not my anticipation.
Well, let's go deeper on that. So what are some of the ways people can start to reestablish that connection? I love how you talk about the environment shaping the body.
Mm-hmm.
Like we think we create our environments, but also our environments create us, and the idea of how like our posture can signal to our brain and our mental state, like our certain posture can actually change the way we feel about ourselves.
Sure.
And those are things we have control over. But I feel like for a lot of people, movement kind of just gets swept into the exercise category.
Totally.
And that's what they think of as movement.
Yeah.
And I think there's so many areas we can all improve within our daily life in reintegrating movement as a lifestyle instead of a thing that we do that's on our checklist. And you talk so much about this and have such good tools for it.
Yeah.
What would be some of those baby steps on reconnecting with our bodies and making movement part of our lifestyle and changing our environment to support that?
Yeah. Well, so the first thing, obviously, like right now as we're recording this, we're sitting down on the ground like a bunch of kids. So like any type of animal, primate, kid, pre-kindergarten, this is how they'd record a podcast. Or healthy, flexible dancer or yogi, or like, maybe a jujitsu person, martial artist. Most of them, for the most part, would be like, oh yeah, let's just throw some mats down, let's do it on the ground. So a person they're running the operating system of, flexible, supple joints, and well circulated bodies. Naturally, they're going to be drawn to spending a little bit more time in those ranges of motion where your hips are going below your knees, essentially. That position, more talk of divorce, has been largely divorced of Western culture as a whole. And so elderly needing assisted living, the number one reason for that is fall risk. You've got all the way down to the ground, and now you can't get up because there's a chasm or a distance between your hips getting down below the height of the knees and all the way down to the ground. You haven't done it for X amount of time, and now you can't do it anymore because those joints have calcified or the muscles have atrophied, and it's just off the table now. So that in and of itself is like, oh my God, if we just continued that process of moving the way that inherently we all have moved forever. And you go to any culture that's pretty much not Western culture, they're still doing that, and suddenly fall risk doesn't exist, and pelvic floor dysfunction is diminished, and osteoarthritis in the hips and the knees is, it's like not a conversation. It's just unbelievable how many billions of dollars and millions of lives that end up losing their own sensation of autonomy and sovereignty could just be re-fulfilled just by making that subtle tweak to say, oh, like maybe around your home, maybe get some floor cushions, maybe get like some Moroccan poofs, get a comfy rug, you know, like have an area like where you're sitting on this infrared mat thing now, you know, so it's like it invites you to come down to the ground and just be there. So the culture shifts. Now suddenly you're taking your ankles and your toes and your knees and your hips and your pelvic floor and through this full range of motion because you just, you know, change your environment for the ground to be more inviting. The other thing, like I mentioned, would be, and this is another chapter in the book, it would be hanging, like introducing some hanging into your daily life. And you know, our shoulders are structured to hang more effectively than the shoulders of monkeys. Okay, so you think of like monkey bars. Monkey bars, a more appropriate name would be ape bars or human bars. You know, so if you look at the distance of our clavicle, the shape of our hands, like this is the whole, like this shoulder, no matter what your belief is, whether you believe in creationism or evolution or whatever you think, like your shoulder is structured to hang off of stuff. And so that's a really simple one. You know, get a pull-up bar inside some doorway that you walk through with regularity. And just as you go through there, you know, in the book, I recommend 90 seconds per day in total. So that can be like 15 seconds, 6 times, whatever you do. And there's another book called Shoulder Pain by a guy called Dr. John Kirsch, who is an orthopedic surgeon. And he found that he suggested that 99% of the patients that he was seeing for some type of shoulder impingement syndrome that he would do surgery for could be completely healed and all the pain and everything reversed just by going through a basic hanging protocol each day. So if you're a person that has slouchy posture or has shoulder pain or has, you know, maybe just wants to have better respiratory capacity or even better cardiovascular function, like you manually opening up space around that torso and around your lungs and, you know, the intercostals, the little muscles connecting your ribs, opening that space up, it changes the way you function at a cellular level. Suddenly it was this compressed space. Now suddenly it's, you open up those cells to be able to breathe and circulate. And it literally changes the shape of and structure of the shoulder girdle by being in that externally rotated hanging position. So those would be 2 things. And we can keep on going on and on. And opening your windows up, you know, getting natural sunlight. Open the windows up entirely so you're not blocking out some portion of that spectrum of light. You know, so when sun's passing through a window, you're not just getting that full spectrum, it's blocking out, it would depend on the window, but it's blocking out some portion of that light. Bringing plants into your house, take walking meetings. If you got a call, you know, do it outside. If you want to get really crazy, you can take your shoes off. Yeah. If you want to look at it from like a bioelectric lens, maybe take your shoes off and particularly be around like trees with deep roots. You know, it's like put yourself near water, you know, a river, maybe near ocean. Start to integrate natural sounds into your home environment or work environment, wherever it may be. You know, so you can just play some digital stuff, or you maybe get like a little water fountain feature or something. You know, all of that sends the indication to your autonomic nervous system that you're safe, you're supported, there's no war happening. You know, when you're around clanging and abrupt noises and things of the sort, you know, it's our auditory system is continually sending feedback to our autonomic nervous system to suggest what's happening in our environment. You know, so if you're getting the feedback that's been infused into us for, you know, millennia, there's like the crackling of a fire, like that sound. That was a very good crackling fire interpretation or impression, but that's been infused in, and it's been shown to cause your nervous system to calm down.
And those like red hues of light.
And the red hues of light.
Yeah.
You know, so it's like, I think, so then overlay the kind of cultural predicament that I think that we're in, if you look at it from a statistical perspective at least. I think the solution that most people look at is what we see in the lobbied for, you know, billions of dollars of advertisements for pharmaceutical drugs, and, you know, these kind of more like symptom-based solutions. They're saying like, okay, cool, like you have this feeling that you're, whatever it may be, you're anxious or you're fat or depressed. It's like, we have a solution, it's in this pill. as opposed to winding back is saying like, maybe there's a chance that you're experiencing these situations because, you're so far away from home.
Yeah.
And that's, there's all sorts of interesting things like Aboriginals being taken out of their place, or Native Americans, or Africans. People like, they're in their home, they're in their tribe, their jaw structures are great, their teeth are great, their blood pressure's great. They don't. The concept of killing themselves is like, what do you mean? Or self-harm or self-hate. Like, what is that? And then suddenly you take them out, place them into captivity or domestication or whatever, the superior place, and suddenly issues start to manifest. No moralistic right, wrong, good, bad. It's just, I think there's deeper solutions than just reaching out for a pill.
I agree, and I love actually that term captivity for like the way we've modern domesticated ourselves. And also just for people who aren't watching this, to call out a few things like your house is very floor friendly. You have all these things to sit on, but
and I have a couch.
And you have a couch.
And I have a TV. And I have like all this stuff is
It's
there.
very
You don't need to be this wily like, oh boy.
Right, you don't have to throw away every chair you own.
No.
It's a both and.
It's a both and.
But you also have a rebounder. We used to have one as well as a coffee table. And the kids could just bounce on it.
Right.
Or we have a gymnastics mat down our hallway.
Right.
And a climbing hangboard in the kitchen.
Yeah.
Because it's like, especially with kids, just put the stuff in their way and they're going to use it.
Yeah, and you don't need another thing to do.
Yeah.
You change the environment and you just be.
Yes, I think that's a huge key. And
that's the key. Like that's that. If there's anything that this incarnation of Aaron, hopefully represents, like it's like that's the thing that I think is the most valuable thing, is to acknowledge it's like we don't need to do more. We can kind of draw back a little bit, make a few subtle shifts, and then just be and see and be able to kind of revel in that change.
And that's what I love about your approach too, is because you're not saying you need to do like deep back squats with heavy weight. You don't need to like do 25 pull-ups. You're saying just hang, which is a natural human movement. Or like,
and back squats are great.
And back squats are
and
great too.
Like all of it. Love working out. Love
Yeah.
getting punched in the face. Love kicking stuff. Love sprinting.
But
love
again,
swimming.
both and for the people who are starting, it's like if you are experiencing these things, just start with the baby steps. Hang.
Yeah.
You don't have to do a pull-up when you're hanging at first. Just hang.
Pay attention to your breath. And this is something that you were talking about a bit. It was of kind of like the chaos or complexity of having like so much stuff going on, and finding that organization and finding just like that, to be able to come back into like what's really happening right now, because our mind typically is like just going all these different directions, like what's really going on right now. We're like, okay, right now, well, I got some pressure on my bum here, I'm sitting back and engaging with this person that I really appreciate. We're kind of naturally attuning to each other, whether we realize it or not. Then you can tap into that attunement. I wonder like, how's my breathing pattern? I bet you it's kind of similar to Kay's right now. Come back, okay, how is my breathing? Oh, I was breathing through my mouth. Oh, that's an indication that maybe I'm like nervous. Or maybe I've at some point learned some type of breathing pattern that's gonna inherently make me feel more anxious and nervous and kind of throw off my whole physiological cycles. So come back, it's like, oh wow, I was breathing through my mouth. I was feeling a little anxious. I had emphasis on the inhalation, maybe, as all these things that would kind of cue me up to be more in sympathetic drive. Like I'm gonna just come back and just notice a slow exhalation through my nose. Okay, I feel a little different. Like just that little instance, suddenly you can start to take control of your physiology and take control of your mind. And there's I don't know where this research came from. We can look it up. There was some research around people doing dishes, and there was two different groups. One of the group was they were paying attention to like the weight of their feet on the ground and like the temperature of the water and like the glistening of the sunlight coming off the suds and the plate in their hands, just paying attention, and then the other group was just washing dishes, just getting through like doing his work. And the group that just paid simple attention to what the heck they were doing, suddenly, their blood pressure decreases and they feel like they do better in creativity tests and they feel a little bit more calm and relaxed. Just by simply saying like, what am I doing right now? Like that question, I think is just such a powerful thing. And I don't think I've ever actually like said that or even really thought about that, but I think that's it, is like, what am I actually doing right now? It's an interesting thing. And then when you come into that place of attention, I think suddenly you kind of come into like, alignment. and then things start to change.
Yeah, and that idea of like, how do I signal the body that it's safe? We've mentioned that concept a couple of times in this interview, and it's things like the breathing and like the being present in the moment.
Yeah.
And those natural light, nature is a huge signal to the body.
And how are you using your eyes? You ever been in a conversation with someone where their eyes are like too piercing? And you're like, what is this person doing? Ugh. It's like freaking me out.
Yeah.
And it's almost like they're like hunting you in a way. Or there's maybe someone that's like, they're too spacey. And it's like, this person's not paying attention to me. They don't care. Like, well, they don't care about me, then I don't care about them. Like, I don't like this person. So like even that dance of communication with our visual system, like we're sending so much information with our eyes. So not only are we sending information with our eyes, so the reason that a person with that piercing gaze might seem like almost like a threat is that's literally, it's cueing, their nervous system is going to be more teed up to be more of a sympathetic drive. More of like get stuff done. Either I'm going to attack or I'm going to run out of the room or I'm like, rah. That's like if you were out in nature and you're just spacing out, taking in the panorama, you're sending the indication to your autonomic nervous system that's like, oh man, I'm just taking it all in, I'm chilling, might have a long exhalation, might even had a sigh. All of that's tied in to make you feel away. Suddenly, there's a mountain lion. All of your attention, your visual attention, focuses on that thing, potential threat. So now suddenly your autonomic nervous system gets queued up to say, okay, get ready to do a thing. So when we're communicating with someone, we're continually sending information back and forth. That's why like not enough eye contact is a little weird, and too much eye contact can be a little weird. And then we're also within that, we are communicating to ourselves with the way that we use our eyes. So if you're experiencing like something like maybe a lot of people, maybe it's just me, but notice like maybe a sensation of, like I said, like anxiety or stress or like, well, for me, I like doing cold plunges or working out or something like that. But the other thing would be like notice the state of your visual muscles when you're in that experience of feeling like kind of wound up. Probably they're a little like piercing, focused type style of seeing. So the opportunity there is to say, first, it's bearing witness to yourself. Say, oh wow, look at that. Just even in doing that, you'll probably relax your eyes. And then from there say, okay, cool. I've got the tools now because I listened to this podcast or I read this book or, I understand how to shift the toggles to make me feel more stimulated, more get up and at 'em and go, or more down-regulated and calm and resting and digesting. So I can, okay, I'm gonna pull the visual toggle. I'm gonna focus in. Okay, now I'm hyped up, ready to go. Oh, I feel anxious, this is too much. Okay, space out, take the whole room in. Okay, look out the window and just, Now stack that with the way that you breathe. Okay, deep inhalation, especially through the mouth, that's gonna add more of that sympathetic drive. What do you do when you're afraid? Right, shoulders come up, maybe your hands clasp, maybe your mandible tightens, and you take this inhalation. What do you do when you're calm and relaxed? Okay, great. Tie that in, the way that you use your eyes, space out, the way that you use your breath, long exhalation through the nose. You can maybe even stack in a little sigh with that as well. Start incorporating sound into it. And then say, okay, what's my postural patterns while I'm in this state? And say, okay, interesting, my shoulders are pretty tight. Chronically, I don't know how to not be stressed. And my solution is like either, whatever plethora of solutions that we might have. So check in, say, oh, my shoulders are tight. My hands are like clenched, or my feet are like grabbing the ground. And so starting to bear witness to what's going on there and say, okay, again, heard this podcast, read in this book, that's probably going to send an indication to my autonomic nervous system to be in that more sympathetic drive state. Okay, shake it out. And then we're slowly starting to take control of our physiology and take control of our felt state just by bearing some frequent witness to ourselves and understanding the tools to create significant change, as opposed to, if you're climbing up the wrong ladder, people have said certain phrases like this. I think it's like Tony Robbins thing. You get to the top of the ladder and you realize that you're on the wrong ladder. It's like, oh man, that's too bad. So it's like first figuring out, it's like, do you actually understand how to effectively toggle these levers in your body? And then from there, stack some intention on top of that and start to pull in the levers. Life just becomes this big, amazing experiment.
Yeah, I love
You
that.
know?
And
Sorry about the ladder analogy. That didn't really work exactly. You know that analogy?
I have heard that analogy as well.
How
Yeah.
does it go exactly?
He ties it in maybe to mountains as well, or I don't know. There's another piece to it. But from a practical level, I think one tip I wanted to make sure I got out of you while we were talking is, for a lot of the women listening, the majority of people listening are women, and especially after having kids, I feel like our bodies get put in a very like forward bent type of position. Our shoulders are down because of nursing, carrying babies.
Yeah.
And I know I've have some hip and shoulder mobility I've been working on. So this is a somewhat self-interested question. Right. But other than the things we talked about, like just sitting on the ground more, sitting in more varied positions, what are some things we can do to start getting back to more natural movement patterns in hips and shoulders?
Yeah. Well, I think looking at the body really from like a joint by joint approach is valuable. And again, you change the environment and naturally, like the ground thing is such a huge thing. Something that would be supportive, continuing with the ground conversation, and we can go through like specific exercises as well, but this is a specific exercise that you would just happen to do on the ground, would be, people call it active rest position. You bring especially if you're like a person that's pregnant, you've been like this like deep anterior tilt hyperlordosis, maybe you're even starting to open up, splay some of those rectus abdominis muscles. The opposite of that position would be the hips slightly flexed, laying on your back. Bring your legs up on top of like the edge of a couch, or if that doesn't quite work, if that's like too high, you put some pillows up on a couch. Or I have a yoga swing hanging in my house that I can literally, I'll put my knees up in it and it'll kind of like traction my low back and my knees. But place yourself in that position and just have it so that your legs are slightly lifted up, so you're really tractioning that sacrum and you're actually creating some space. So the sacrum ideally is think of your sacrum like a sailboat, and it's like floating in the ocean that is your sacroiliac joint and your lumbar spine and all that stuff. So allowing that time to just be in that position of traction, and you could bring maybe like a couple little like light weights, like little like maybe 10-pound kettlebells or something, drop them down into the space in the front of the hips. And I have all of these videos, people, there's like examples of this in the book. We also have an online program that we can provide the link for, and I have tons of free videos on YouTube and Instagram and such. But that's a really beautiful way just to be in that position. You could do like maybe 6 breaths from that position, or maybe like a little 5-minute meditation. Bring the weight, find any place in the abdomen that feels a little bit like tense, and just allow that weight to gently rest into that space, and use the weight as feedback to breathe into that part of the abdomen that's been clenching for who knows how long. Emphasizing that pressure in and around the hips to start to open up like the iliacus and the iliopsoas and all those like deep hip flexor muscles. That's going to be a really beautiful starting point. And then from there, changing as far as a specific like exercise type example, changing the way that we're doing sit-ups, and not being just something where you're violently like cranking your neck up into some weird dysfunctional position, but from that position where you're in this active resting position now, keep your neck nice and long and start to just raise your shoulders, like your thoracic spine up off of the ground, bring your hands on your belly and just feel that contraction really specifically in those ab muscles. And you're not crunching your neck up, you're not doing any kind of like this other stuff where you're putting your body in a twisted position. You can bring your hands up against your knees. You put a little block in between your knees, start to activate that midline, those adductor muscles. Put a block in between your knees, boom, press that together. You put your hands against your knees, bring your elbows in nice and tight as well. So like in towards your body, press the hands against the knees, call it like a dead bug position. And those, it's reintegrating or like reinstating the integrity of the midsection that's so valuable for people, that for the most part, people walking around with like, it's like sexy to have like the Brazilian booty thing. Your butt's like hanging out, it's kind of like waddling, but your abdomen is totally just splaying forward. And there's not a lot of strength or integrity in that position. So that's like a really simple I think I might have explained that decently, but people can check out. Like I said, we have videos and such. We include links for that. Specific exercises, but that's a beautiful thing. And generally getting into the awareness of the idea as an overarching principle, ribs tucking down towards the hips is typically going to be supportive for most positions. So if you have that tendency of really flaring yourself open, like flaring the ribs, when you are doing anything athletic, pretty much, or just standing in line, in a bank or something like that, that's like standing is a complex position, yoga, Tadasana, mountain pose, like you can write a book about Tadasana. Like it's a meaningful position. And for the most part, something that would help people in general, not just women post-pregnancy, would be to get in the habit of slightly tucking those ribs, just allowing them to like rest down towards the hips. And that will create more stabilization and integrity in that cylinder that is your torso. Does that make sense? I know it's hard to describe exercises, but
that does make sense.
As
And
far as
people
like a
watching,
specific
they can
thing.
see you kind of explaining it. I know you have videos we can link to as well if you don't mind sending me
Yeah,
links
of
to those
course.
specific ones. Those will be in the show notes.
Yeah. If you go, alignpodcast.com has links to all this stuff, and then in the book, thealignbook.com, I think is what it is. Yeah, thealignbook.com. That takes you right to the book, and so almost everything that we're explaining, at least from like an exercise perspective, is in the book. So, and then there's videos that go along with it as well.
Yeah, and I'll make sure that's linked as well, because I think that's the one limitation of podcasting is trying to explain somewhat visual and very somatic concepts via audio.
Mm-hmm.
But I know you do such a great job in the book.
Yeah.
And you also have the videos, so I'll make sure people can find those. But talk a little bit more about the book before we finish up. And just,
Sure.
I know it goes so many other directions beyond what we could cover in just an hour podcast.
Yeah, I'm really excited about the book. And so I think that's something. Are most of the things that you've created that way, or do you have anything that you're like just like full F yeah, like I love this thing that I created? Do you think is that most of the books or blogs or podcasts or?
Yes, but I think the more I live and the more I learn, I would still like add and change things now.
Yeah.
But I think when I created them, I was very much hell yes about them.
Yeah.
And still am. I think.
Yeah, that's the tendency. It's why you come back in 5 years, you're like, it's kind of a piece of crap.
Which is great. That means you're always constantly learning.
You're evolving. But at this point, at this present state, I'm like, if there's one resource that I would give to someone that wanted to understand how to effectively use their body in daily life, and get the most out of their body in the present moment, and then also tapping into longevity and there's other relevant conversations. Honestly, truly, like that is the absolute function of this book. It's an aggregation of all of the most meaningful tools that I've gathered from doing 370 odd podcast episodes and working with clients for the last 18 years and getting to just connect with all these amazing minds that I'm just so humbled and grateful to have access to those people over the years. Everything that I found to be absolutely the most valuable in that time frame, I put into this book, which I'm so excited about. And the way I describe it is if you were an alien and you had no idea how to drive the body, like you're just like, how do I work this thing? This would essentially be the user's manual to be able to tap into effective physical mechanics, but then also broaden the conversation of how to start to utilize your senses, to touch and your auditory senses and visual and the other parts of movement to make you feel either more stimulated or awake, or help you to downregulate or calm down or go to sleep. I think that's a really an untouched aspect, not completely untouched. Andrew Huberman is a good resource for this. Patrick McEwen for Brit stuff is a good resource. There's a lot of really good resources, but to be able to integrate that physical move, deadlift, pull up world with the way that our senses also inform our physiology, to be able to bridge those together and start to integrate them into the way that you show up in conversation or show up at the gym or show up in business or relationship, and acknowledging that you're moving all day long and here's the manual on how to do it more effectively. That's the function of the Align method.
Well, I'm a huge fan. I'll definitely make sure, like I said, it's linked. I definitely recommend it. I think it has some super practical tips and also have a lot of crossover with our kids. I think in a lot of ways, kids are great movement teachers because they do many of the things you talk about naturally. And also there's so many good tips that I think when we put these things in our kids' way and we create a better environment, we end up with happier kids. So for all the parents listening, this is a great way to reduce the stress level in your house.
Right.
and there's some super practical tips. So
Yeah, and your kids. I mean, I would go to you for your opinion on this, but I think your kids care a lot less about what you say than what you do, and like who you are. You know, you don't teach what you know, you teach what you are. You know, and so tapping the way that you change who and what you are is to start to augment your environment. You know, augment the way that you conduct yourself and live and breathe and move and think when no one's watching. And then suddenly when your kids come in the room and you have some valuable lesson to bestow upon them, they're like, cool, whatever, Dad, what are you doing? Like, how do you communicate? How do you sit? How do you stand? How do you breathe? I'm attuning to the way that you show up. You know,
that's literally how babies learn too. So if we do it, they will follow much more than if we just say it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So thanks for doing this.
Thank you for being here again. It's always such a fun conversation, such a pleasure. And to echo again, you guys check out the book. It's awesome. I've gotten a chance to preview it. Highly recommend.
Thank you. And then, I have a podcast coming out with you on a line podcast. So whenever you release this, we can just co-release that. So if people want to continue this conversation, then we'll do a simul release on there.
Yeah, check out both podcasts. I'll send people links to your website and your book and your YouTube videos.
Sweet.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thanks as always to you guys for listening, sharing your most valuable resources, your time, your energy, and your attention with us today. We're both so grateful that you did. And I hope that you will join me again next time.
Bye. Thank you. Over now.
Cool.